drunken parents. Did I know anything then about beauty or need to? Yes. I caught a sunfish once, a golden marvel the size of my hand. They're no good for eating, someone said. Throw it back. I stared at the fine weave of its scales, the pale calico of white, yellow, orange, the body so thin. I knew the place it came from was deeper than I could ever see or dive to, that beauty could come up from a dark and cold place, and mercy was a skill my hands would have to learn. So I suppose in the spirit of a fairly dark week of trouble on the American streets, it would be okay to read you a poem of a slightly dark encounter where nothing terrible happens in it. But I once had a very scary cab ride in Seattle. Gee, I can't remember what books these poems are in. I guess that's funny. What book is Arboretum in? Thank you. I thought so. So, you know, most of our lives and most of the people that we encounter are peaceable and balanced and want the best out of everything. But every once in a while, you come close to something that you think, wow, I wish I hadn't come close to that. And then here's this poem, an urban nature poem. Arboretum. Walking to cure myself of the gun-proud cabbie who brought me here. Azalea, camellias, pink rhododendron, falling in a storm of flowers. The government, his enemy, to blame for lack of morals, parents arrested, guns taken if they discipline their children. I find a Japanese cherry in full bloom, though its foot-thick truck is scarred with a healing gash that spirals from the ground up the bark to where the wood narrows, branching to waterfall over my head. Of the human and infant rubble fallen in Oklahoma City, he bemoaned only what he called the government's latest scapegoat, and considered what he'd do if agents came to the door to take his guns. Better to run than fight so they wouldn't kill his wife and child, he guessed. Should I fear him or what he fears? He's the one who says he'd do something about it if he saw a woman raped, not like those New Yorkers, a dozen staring, getting off, or too scared to act. Should I fear him or the ones he fears? 8 black guys stopped his cab. If it weren't for this gun, it was tucked, then I knew it, under his seat. I'd be dead. Should I fear him or the one he fears? I, who believe, little do-gooder, daydreamer, Girl Scout, that we should have no guns, no sovereign states, no infidelity, no greed. I'm the only woman walking here alone under the crowned trees. Rich houses on the hill across the street train their glass eyes on a distant flowering. So I was talking today about work I'd done in the H.J. Andrews Experimental Forest, which is a long-term ecological research site where a lot of really interesting science has been done on the Pacific Northwest forests. And one of the cool sites up there is, I was talking about it this afternoon, is the tree decomposition site where these gigantic Doug firs are laid down on the forest floor. It takes 200 years for them and they rot into the soil. And they're doing all these studies measuring what happens to the carbon and what kind of animals use it and what kinds of bugs use it and what can we learn from the long time it takes for these trees to rot. And they're all dead and just sliced and laid in these long stretches on the ground. So they sent a bunch of poets and philosophers in there to write about this, and they're sort of a sciencey joke. I love science jokes. So you know what horticulture is, about growing plants. So they call this place, because it's full of all these dead trees, a place where they study morticulture, the growth that comes out of death. So I was there with a team of scientists and learning about what was going on. And they said, well, why don't we just, hang out here for a little while and just be quiet. And if you want to write in your notebooks, do. So I lay down on this giant moss-covered tree. It was the most peaceful place I'd been. And I wrote this poem. And my mother, at 102, was near her death at that time and having a hard time dying. And I realized that afterwards that I had written this poem for her, and my scientist friend there, Fred Swanson, said he thought that I had taken my grief counseling from the forest. So this is a poem called This Ground Made of Trees, dedicated to the memory of my mother, who adored this poem very near her death. This ground made of trees. The giants have fallen. I think I can hear the echo of their slow composition, the centuries passing as note by note they fall into the forest's silent music. Moss has run over their backs, mushrooms have sprung from the moss, mold has coated the fungal caps, and the heartwood has given itself to muffled percussion of insect and microbe, that carpet of sound that gives the forest its rhythm. A nuthatch twits or a vole cheeps. The scent of decay rises like steam from a stew pot. Anywhere I set my foot, a million lives work at metabolizing what has gone before them. The day is shortening, and the winter wrens have something to say about that. I can almost give thanks that the soil will claim me. But first, allow me, dear life, a few more words of praise for this ground made of trees, where everything is an invitation to lie down in the moss for good and become finally really useful, to pull closed the drapery of lichen and let the night birds call me home. I still want to cry for my mom when I read that. Okay, I think just 2 or 3 more and we'll invite Liz up. So this title poem from the book, the most recent book, the book is called Rope. It has an epigraph from a French Caribbean writer, Saint-Jean Paris, who wrote a book called Praises. I loved this statement about rope. I think about rope a lot. I'm going to read you a poem called Rope. He said, one has only to serve like an old rope. I love that thought because we always think, well, God, the world's a mess, everything's screwed up, it's too much, the task is too big, how can we solve all these problems? And one has only to serve like an old rope. Any small good deed will do today. Thank you. So I spend the summers just a little bit north of here, in the Bay of Fundy on an island called Grand Manan, an island my parents first started going to when I was a child. A fishing island, a working island. 2,000 people live up there, and they've always been fishing families for a couple hundred years, but like everywhere else, that doesn't work so much anymore, as you'll hear in the poem. I noticed a weird thing started happening. My father, my lover, my son-in-law, men seem to have a thing for old rope on the beach. All this fishing rope washes up, and the men all seem to want to pick it up and bring it home. This smelly, tattered, horrible rope. I kept thinking, what is this about anyway? So I wrote a poem. When we don't know the answer, we write a poem. Rope. The man gathers rope every summer off the stone beaches of the north. There is no sand in this place, where the Labrador Current runs like an artery through the body of the Atlantic, channeling particles that once were glacial ice and now are molecules, making not one promise to anyone. The man gathers rope with his hands, both the rope and the hands worn from use. The rope from hauling up traps and trawl lines. The hands from banging into rocks, rusted nails, fish knives, winch gears, and bark. The rope starts to pull apart, fiber by fiber, like the glacial ice. And the man wishes he could find a way to bind it back together, the way a cook binds syrup or sauce with cornstarch. The rope lies in the cellar for years, coiled, stinking of the sea and the fish that once lived in the sea, and the sweat of the man who wishes he could save one strand of the world from unraveling. Okay, 2 more poems. Another one from the Pacific Northwest, and then one from here, Maine. We talked about hope today and how hard it is to, you just don't want to say, oh yeah, everything's a mess, but hey, have hope. You want to kind of dig down into where the sources of hope might actually be, where we find the energy and the spiritual force to feel good about the future. And of course, for me, and I think for most naturalists, people who spend a lot of time out in the wilds, it comes up in the cycles of nature. It always comes back to us that it's all cyclical. However bad it is, it's turning, and something new rises. So this is a poem from a little forest patch along Coast Highway, just of Lincoln City, Oregon, south, between Lincoln City and Pacific City, a place called Drift Creek. In spring, Drift Creek. Walking into the hemlock forest, a place where men years ago had left their work of notching platforms into giant trunks where they stood in teams to saw. We found soft hulks of long dead timber rotting back into the earth with a fragrance honest as rain. We found oyster mushrooms and peeled them from the licheny bark of alders. It was a place where beavers had changed the way water moves over land, where an otter drew a gentle whirl on the pond's canvas, where elk had left the imprint of their strength in the duff. We were still there when the rain began, freckling the standing water and making the young skunk cabbage leaves shine as if at the opening of a new world. And now I am holding that stillness to give it back to you, because the truth is, so much of the world is broken, and I want to be part of its healing. Okay, we try to be funny in the environmental community. It's really hard. Here's a funny one, I think. I'll close with a funny one. So, I know you all feel a deep kinship with all creatures, great and small. Even mosquitoes, right? Maybe not. Okay. I thought I was going to really work on myself, I went to see the most endangered lighthouse on the eastern seaboard, which is a little tiny lighthouse on Ross Island off the coast of Grand Manan. It's just been battered for decades, and it refuses to fall into the sea. Well, there's no people on the island. There's a few deer and a very large pond, stagnant pond. I went there with my friend at dusk. What were we thinking? To take pictures because the light would be so good. And this is how I worked on myself after that experience. Mosquitoes. This actually was published in the journal American Scientist, which I'm very proud of. Mosquitoes. First came the scouts, who felt our sweat in the air and understood our need to make a sacrifice. We were so large and burdened with all we had carried, our blood too rich for our own good. They understood that we could give what they needed and never miss it. Then came the throng, encircling our heads like acoustic halos, droning with the me of appetite. We understood their pleasure to find such hairless beasts so easy to open and drink. We understood their female ardor to breed and how little they had to go on considering the protein required to make their million-fold eggs. Vibrant, available, and hot, we gave our flesh in selfless service to their future. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, knock 'em out.
Not until the end. I'll clip it in. Am I okay? I don't need that thing till the very end. Yeah. I want to start, gosh, I've admired Allison's work for so many years, and to hear her read it at last and have some conversations has just been such a privilege. So Michelle, thank you so much for inviting me to be up here with Allison and to talk with you folks about integrating poetry and science and kind of finding a world where everything comes together. It's a real treat to be here. I want to start with a poem, not my own, but by the poet Annie Finch. I have some sheets of paper over there on the book table with broadsides from my press, Broadsided Press. If you're interested, take them. They're for you. But this is a poem called, I've been thinking a lot about Boston, empathy, comfort. And so this is a poem called Landing Underwater Icy Roots. All the things we hide in water, hoping we won't see them go. Forests growing underwater press against the ones we know. And they might have gone on growing, and they might now breathe above. Everything I speak of sowing, everything I try to love. And then we get to me, who's not so nice. I'm going to read a hodgepodge of things, I think. I'm going to start with a poem called Multi-Use Area. And this was written when I lived up in Alaska. And I think Maine has an essence that's kind of similar to Alaska. A lot of people who love open space, sometimes for very different reasons. Do you have multi-use areas here in Maine? Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. Multi-use area. Wood the day on the hay flats, sun slight through clouds, grasses just starting again from last year's grasses, geese and cranes bugling over the marsh, have been better without the old tires, the gutted couch in a pullout, a moose slumped alongside, meat taken but the head still attached. I can close my eyes to the pop bottles, booze bottles, and orange skeet shells in the parking lot, along the river, walk past them. I can pretend my own steps through the marsh convey a different presence, but I can't close my ears. There, a white-fronted goose. There, a pintail, willow branches cracking underfoot, F-14s from the base. And there, again, the shotgun blast and whoop, which I can't edit out, which I probably shouldn't. It stops when I walk into view. I stop and stare across the flats through my binoculars, thinking, asshole. And of course, someone staring back at me over a truck bed, thinking, asshole. And that's how we get along. I'm going to bump around a little bit. My apologies. I'm going to read a poem from this new book. I think is going to be called Once Removed. I'm going to show a video poem later. That's why that's up there, but it'll be at the end. It's called Sex on the Amazon. I work as a naturalist, and for the last couple of years, I was serving as an expedition leader on small boats on the Peruvian Amazon, so around Iquitos, Peru. So we had a boat of about, 26 passengers, me, and Peruvian crew. And It's a beautiful place. The birds are off the charts. There's monkeys, there's pink river dolphins, and it's interesting socially. So this is a poem called Sex on the Amazon. There's one word I should probably define. It's called, it's varzea, which is the term for a seasonally flooded forest. So if you think about tides, 6 up, 6 down, a varzea is a seasonally flooded forest. So in the Amazon, you have basically 6 months toward high water, 6 months toward low water. So it's a yearly tide cycle, so to speak, there. And so in the high water season, the river comes up around the trees, swallows the roots and trunks, and the fish are nosing along there. And sometimes when the water's down a little bit, you can walk on this land that at some point is flooded. And all the biology is true. Sex on the Amazon. Carlos and I talk about whale penises because most of the monkeys here don't have prehensile tails. Jorge, the paramedic, doesn't understand English, but understands this and laughs. Most birds don't have a penis. I make my hands into tubes, bump ends for the cloacal kiss, except ducks. Jorge nods, twirls a corkscrew above his lap. Porque agua? We laugh. I am the only woman on the crew, the only American. When I first came aboard after my name, I was asked by each man if I had children. Do you have children? Do you have children? Do you have children? Pity, puzzlement at no. Only Manuel, who is not the youngest, is not a father. After the Varzea walk with Juan, passengers talk about miraculous plants. One cures bronchitis. One weans a child, and the sap of one can turn a man gay. Oh, tree fronded, twined, scurried, and surely fluttered by morphos, deep blue as crepuscular sky yet shining, surely smooth-trunked and buttressed to allow flamboyant sway. Why have I not seen you? Where do you flourish? 5 weeks together on this boat, 5 trips, 5 groups for our repeated stories. This time, when Lucho asks about my husband, I say she. He doesn't seem to notice, but they say she about each other, slippage of a Romance language. On this side of the Andes, no one likes Mario Vargas Llosa. In his novel, the women of Iquitos are hot, loose. Now they get trouble in Lima. Pablo's daughter comes to visit the ship. My baby, he says, she is 16. When a passenger asks about AIDS, Javier says it's better now. There are programs and condoms, there are discos in Nauta and Iquitos, and no one throws fruit during the parade. But, article of key importance, hairdressers still travel up and down the river. Beautiful canoe cutting the bank, bright feathers bowed up the paddle's shaft, parasols abloom over groomed heads, and fine shears glinting like a quick piranha. Who welcomes you? Later, Javier tells me about a gay demonstration on the cathedral steps, kissing. The face he makes is like a mouth of bitter sap. I know what I sound like here. He, she, 5 weeks together on a boat. We make jokes about the animals, do our jobs. One day, Carlos helps me ask a boy if I can try his canoe. They hold it steady, hand me a paddle, then won't let me go. Ridiculous, my she-husband, my childlessness, this dugout not built for the likes of me. That tree, I want to tell them its sap is the most delicious thing I have ever tasted. This poem is called Losing a Father. It's one of this Butch series of poems from my first book. I think, there's plenty of queer poems in our world, but not quite enough praising the non-traditionally appearing woman. So this is Butch Poem 4, Losing a Father. With him, something left her, some hook by which she gaffed the world and held it to sense, to love, to logic, despite the awkward ground she'd learned to claim. His best son, at his side, she cleared gutters of leaves, shoveled the drive, changed the Chevy's oil, sat back after dinner, heavy in a chair. She learned to be a gentleman. Hard at first for him to see her tapping out his cigarettes, wearing his old belt and shoes, to see what she took as her own. He came again to love her, and to love even what rested silent between them, and she knew her luck. But when he died, some of her swagger, some of her bull-headed sureness, some hope to be praised for the likeness she'd made was shaken. I have no metaphors to lend this, just witness to her decentering, just certainty that only the loss of her mother, the self she made herself against, could be more difficult. So I'm really interested in poems that kind of look at the natural and the social and deny those divisions of nature poetry, confessional poetry. And this is a poem called Getting Out. Do you guys ski-jor in Maine? Do ski-joring? So ski-joring is awesome, and any place that has snow should do it. You can take a dog and you hook him up to a harness, and you hook yourself up to the harness, and you ski along behind. So you're kind of towed, but you're kind of doing your own work at the same time, and it's a great way to get around. And we don't do it enough. I didn't do it enough when I was in Alaska, but I got to do it a few times. So this poem is called Getting Out. How in love with myself I was on the iced-over river. Alaska range sprawled miles around, skiered trails of snow machines across the low hills, spruce, and a few hours of thin blue sky the day. Laced into 3 pins, sweating in the perfect 10 above, ski-jor harness snug on my hips. At last, I was in this February, air silent of most birds, not in Anchorage's Tacoma-ness, its 5 lanes and conveniences, but on skis, in the mountains, an old dog pulling me toward a cabin of logs, its weather door a thorning of nails, point out to deter bears. Do you know this moment when you expand at last from the clench of the daily, find yourself bodily glad, at last discovering pride, or whatever word we don't have for such pure chest bursting, not something to be stuffed into a pocket, but vast and permissible. And now I want to read some icy poems. I mean, that was kind of icy, but it's more civilized ice, and I want to read from more extreme ice, I guess. My second book of poems is a book about Arctic and Antarctic exploration, and I find myself still really fascinated by why explorers went and what those high latitudes have to offer us as sites of exploration and imagination, really. And I'm working on this collection of poems about this guy, Donald B. McMillan. And he was born, he's interesting to me because he was born in Provincetown on Cape Cod, where I live, and grew up there. His dad died in a fishing accident. His mom died soon after from hard work, basically. He almost went with Perry to the North Pole. He spent his life exploring the Arctic, bringing students to the Arctic later on, took almost 30 voyages up there. And I've just been trying to trace my life in Provincetown and the Arctic with his life and those shifts in time and space. So this is one of those poems, I think the only one I'll read. It's called I Am Lowing, for polar explorer Donald B. McMillan. And it's inspired by an article I read in Science News about scientists looking at Google Earth images of cow herds and seeing what was happening with them. And that's kind of in the poem. I guess I should say it was written When I was living in California, having moved from Alaska, here's all the geographic triangulation, feeling totally out of place everywhere. I am lowing for Arctic explorer Donald B. McMillan. Chewing cud or pissing into crabgrass, cows orient their bodies toward the poles. You're not surprised, Mac. You know what it is to feel your iron self pulled. Deer, too, and other grazers observed in fields shot by satellites tend north-south. I'm living in a city and it's loud. The pole star is faint through civic aurora. When power lines cross herds, animals redirect themselves to that hummed path. They don't mean to. Since moving here, I've flown east-west a dozen times, back north only once. Mac, birds, whales, and bees align. I know I yearn along a worn rut in the earth's field, as you did. I don't mind being unoriginal in this way. So why the poles? This is the prelude to approaching ice. Because this life, this alarm clock, time card, percolator, direct deposit, income tax stoplight, seems vast and blank and numbing. Tell me secret orchids hide between the black rock and the ice. Tell me a wild bird sings deep in the crevasses, wing strokes cracking air. Tell me there's a surface we can walk on, lidding miles of plumed and luminescent fish. I'm ready to be amazed. I'm longing for it. In this book, there's a few themes. I work in these little themes. There's a few themes in the book. One is a series of poems about various Arctic and Antarctic explorers, mostly the Antarctic in this book. Their lives are so interesting. Scott, Shackleton, Amundsen, all those guys, mostly guys. But there are some lesser known figures that are really interesting, and Antarctica especially is fascinating to me as a place where there's no indigenous culture that we really messed up. There was no human habitation down there before we started hunting for seals down there, and then later exploring for pure and scientific aims. And so the imagination can kind of be permitted this vast roaming over the ice, except for when you think about the animals, but that's a different argument altogether. So this is a poem called Polar Explorer Karsten Borchgrevink. I'm sure you've all heard of him. 1895, 1899. A generally useful hand on the Norwegian Antarctic, Borchgrevink sets foot on Cape Adair. No guesswork of pot shards or chipped flint to confirm this first landing on the continent. Logbooks and diaries in languages still living document it. 4 years pass. Borchgrevink returns, sets up a hut and shed, stocks it with socks, tins of peas, tobacco. He stays the winter with 10 men and 75 dogs. He dines on penguins that, in the course of their wanderings, arrive. This is the sole record we have of a continent's first human habitation. But what slim hold history has even here. Our countable arrivals set against beaches cobbled with seals, 500,000 birds in this spot at breeding, thunderheads of krill. Along the thin walls that held the men that winter, adelies have continued to gather and shit, raising their young. And so the oldest building on Antarctica is nearly ruined, nearly buried in guano, nearly overwritten with sound and stink, with the fertile plenty of unrecorded lives going on. And I'll read one more from Approaching Ice, and then, show this sneaky video thing. So this poem is called Wissa, Antarctica, 1961. And Wissa is spelled W-Y-S-S-A, W-Y-S-S-A, 5 letters. And it's actually a code that means all my love, darling. And when in the 60s, they were starting to be able to communicate via Morse code, wireless transmissions from Antarctica back to Australia, but it wasn't perfect because there's crazy atmospheric stuff going on down there, and a lot of those transmissions would get interrupted. So they developed these code phrases that were based on other code phrases used, called the Bentley phrase code, Wissa being one of them. And in the poem itself are many of the actual phrase codes that are defined within the poem. Wissa, Antarctica, 1961. Compressed for Morse. Compressed to better the odds this first flimsy signal might send sense across ocean, unbroken. I type just Wissa, which you know means all my love, darling, in this telegraph of foreseen longing. In further news, Yehik. I have grown a beard which is generally admired, and with it will tease the soft hollow between your hip bones as you lie in the green field beyond our gate, or, if you dislike the beard, I will lay my head in your lap and let you cut it from me, cut away my months gone and burn them, acrid and bitter. Wuigut, elephant seals are breeding. And although their heaving is nothing like our shadows against cabbage rose wallpaper, I am aroused. They are the only flesh here, and they slap against each other with unrelenting fervor. Yogip, please send details of bank account. Do you have enough? Has my time here at least fattened something? Can I afford to say Wissa again? Yair, fine snow has penetrated through small crevices in the buildings. I am cold, and although we decided this code with your breath still against my neck, your heat anything but distant, believe that my heart's capacity has, if anything, expanded in this chill. Yonoi, from now on, all I hammer against the sounding metal of this small machine is Wissa, all of it. And I want to end with this. We'll see how it works. There's a recorded sound, but I'm going to read over it. I worked down in Antarctica, not this past December, but the one before, on an expedition ship. And it turned out the ship's doctor was an artist. So you have the ship's naturalist as a poet, the ship's doctor as an artist. It was really great. And she does a lot of video work. And she makes these beautiful, lyric, strange videos. So we decided to try and collaborate. So she sent me a few of her videos, and I wrote poems to them, which was a really different experience for me. Because here you have, 2.5 minutes of video. Write a 2.5-minute poem, and what is that going to look like? So it was a really different process for me, and it was really exciting and fun. So I just want to share with you one of these. I thought this was kind of the most science-y of the lot in a way, except for the long one, which is too long. And it's called Travel of the Light. And hopefully I can get the timing right. When I was recording these, the sound for these videos, I was kind of sitting by myself at my desk with this little microphone kind of whispering to myself. It was a really different vibe than reading when I can look at all you guys. So I tend to read a lot faster when I'm in public than when I'm all by myself. So hopefully I'll time it okay. And this poem is inspired a little bit by Arctic maps. Some of the maps from East Greenland by the Inuit, they would carve wood, which was an incredibly precious commodity in the treeless north. And they would carve these maps so you could feel the contours of the land. So even if you couldn't hold up something and look at it, you had this little piece of wood in your mitten and you could feel where you were. And if you dropped it overboard, it would float, which was great. And there's other map references, and then some later references to the way that birds navigate. So let's see if I can make this happen. Travel of the Light. In the north, Maps were not made from an envisioned height, but low, from the skin boat, a piece of wood or bone held up to horizon, carved so peaks spoke to peaks, aligned as home. Let me search back. Let me search for landmarks, for clear and fixed positions. I remember the airport in Tucson. You found me at my gate, waiting to leave. Love, you said, and marked me. That waypoint, that beginning. South Pacific maps were baskets of wind and wave, vector and junction. Sky breath, pitch and yaw, enough to cross what seems featureless. Some pasts we need to be untraceable. When she left her house, my grandmother threw out 60, 70 years of diaries. She did not offer them. I've always loved the skillful monsters and unsettled edges of old maps. I can tell how hard they were trying. My heart, I am so often lost. How do we map our time apart? When the first to this ice wandered it, were blinded by its days-long glare, they ate birds, found rocks inside the gut, evidence of shore beneath the shore that continues to revise itself. How and when do we fix memory or learn what to forget? A navigator knows time and distance magnify small errors. What is the course steered compared to the track made good? What set? What drift? In laboratory dark, birds leap toward their routes. Their inked feet prove again and again that they know which way and when to begin. Thank you.
Thank you to Allison. Thank you to Liz. Thank you to the K2 Foundation for making this evening possible. And thank you to everybody in the audience for coming and being a part of it. I hope you'll join us at an informal reception behind the fireplace and have a chance to speak with the poets and with each other.